The year is 1962. The air is thick with fear, and the tension between two superpowers has reached a boiling point. For 13 days in October, the fate of the world hung by a thread. This is the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the day the world almost ended. The story begins in the aftermath of World War II. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as global superpowers, locked in a bitter ideological struggle. Democracy versus communism, capitalism versus socialism. The Cold War wasn't just a clash of ideologies. It was an arms race, a space race, and a battle for influence that spanned the globe. By the early 1960s, both nations possessed nuclear arsenals capable of obliterating humanity many times over. Cuba soon became the focal point of this intense rivalry. In 1959, Fidel Castro overthrew the Batista regime and established a communist government just 90 miles from American shores. For the United States, this was an unacceptable threat. The CIA orchestrated the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, a failed attempt to overthrow Castro. This humiliation only pushed Cuba closer to the Soviet Union, solidifying their alliance and setting the stage for one of the most dangerous confrontations in human history. By mid-1962, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev decided to deploy nuclear missiles to Cuba. His move was partly to counterbalance American missiles in Turkey and Italy, which posed a direct threat to the Soviet Union. The plan was carried out in secrecy, and by October, missile sites were under construction in Cuba. These developments would soon thrust the world into an unprecedented crisis. On October 14, 1962, an American U-2 spy plane captured photographic evidence of the missile sites. When President John F. Kennedy was briefed, the severity of the situation became clear. The discovery meant that nuclear weapons capable of striking the eastern United States were just a short flight away. This stark reality demanded an immediate and decisive response. Kennedy convened his closest advisors in what became known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, or EXCOM. The group debated options: a full-scale invasion of Cuba, airstrikes to destroy the missile sites, or a naval blockade to prevent further Soviet shipments. Each option carried significant risks. Direct military action could provoke a Soviet counterattack, potentially escalating into nuclear war. A blockade, while less aggressive, might not force the Soviets to remove the missiles. On October 22nd, Kennedy addressed the nation and revealed the crisis to the world. He announced a quarantine of Cuba to prevent further Soviet shipments of weapons. Kennedy's choice of words was deliberate. A quarantine avoided the connotations of war while still signaling firm action. He issued a stark warning to the Soviet Union. Any nuclear attack launched from Cuba would be considered an attack by the USSR on the United States, prompting a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. The world held its breath. Over the next 6 days, the situation escalated as American and Soviet forces prepared for the possibility of war. U.S. Navy ships enforced the blockade, intercepting Soviet vessels bound for Cuba. On October 24th, Soviet ships approaching the quarantine line stopped or reversed course, a small but significant step toward de-escalation. Still, tensions remained dangerously high. The crisis reached its peak on October 27th, a day that came to be known as Black Saturday. That morning, an American U-2 reconnaissance plane was shot down over Cuba, killing the pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson Jr. The incident brought the two superpowers perilously close to open conflict. At the same time, a Soviet submarine near the blockade, armed with a nuclear torpedo, was harassed by U.S. Navy ships. Misunderstanding the situation, the submarine's captain considered launching the weapon. Only the intervention of Vasily Arkhipov, a senior officer on board, prevented a catastrophic escalation. Behind the scenes, frantic diplomatic efforts continued. Robert Kennedy, the president's brother and attorney general, met secretly with Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. The two sides worked out a delicate compromise. Publicly, the United States would pledge not to invade Cuba. Privately, they agreed to remove American missiles from Turkey within a few months. In return, the Soviet Union would dismantle its missile sites in Cuba. On October 28th, Khrushchev announced that the Soviet Union would withdraw its missiles from Cuba. The immediate crisis was over, but the world was forever changed. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a chilling reminder of how close humanity came to destruction. It underscored the catastrophic potential of nuclear weapons and the necessity of clear communication and diplomacy. The resolution of the crisis led to lasting changes. In 1963, the United States and the Soviet Union established the Hotline, a direct communication link between Washington and Moscow to prevent future misunderstandings. That same year, the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was signed, marking a step toward reducing the threat of nuclear conflict. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains one of the most significant moments of the 20th century, a time when humanity stood on the brink of annihilation. It demonstrated the fragility of peace and the need for rational leadership during times of crisis. The lessons of those 13 days in October continue to resonate, serving as a sobering reminder of the responsibilities borne by nations wielding immense destructive power. As we reflect on the Cuban Missile Crisis, we are reminded not just of the fear and danger of that time, but of the resilience and wisdom that ultimately prevailed. The decisions made during those tense days shaped the course of history and left an enduring legacy. In a world that still faces the specter of nuclear weapons, the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis offers both a warning and a beacon of hope,